All right, so now that we've converted our list notes route over to take ownership into account in our database, let's do the same thing for the rest of our routes. So what this is going to look like, we're going to go into here, we're going to open up create note route, update note route, and delete note route, and we're going to update these as well. Now, one thing that we're not going to do currently, this won't happen until a little bit later in our development process, we're not currently going to put safeguards in place to stop a user from, sort of hacking our server by providing the wrong ID, right? For our list notes route that we just created, a user could quite easily send a request with the wrong ID to this route and get all of their notes and be able to read those. And this is something that we're going to take a look at later on once we actually incorporate those kind of things more deeply into our full stack application. So for now, we're going to be ignoring those things, but that's just something to keep in the back of your mind that we still need to do. So starting off with our create note route here, just like we did with our list notes route, we're probably going to want to modify the path of this one a little bit to fit in with our RESTful conventions. So we're going to say /users/user ID /notes, and that will basically be used to signify that we're adding a new note to this user with the ID that we're providing here, okay? And that's not a strict necessity, but it will make it easier for now, which is kind of the reason why I'm doing it here. So what we need to do in this endpoint is, in addition to creating this new note and inserting it into the notes DB, we also need to take the ID of that newly generated note and add that to the user who just created it. Okay, so essentially what that's going to look like, we're going to need to get the user's ID from this path, from this URL parameter here by saying const user ID equals request.params. And then we're going to need to assign this randomly generated UUID to a new variable so that we can use it in multiple places. We're going to say const new note ID equals UUID. And then we can say UUID new note ID. And everything else with the note will work exactly the same as before, except now we can add this new note ID to the user's document in MongoDB. So after we've inserted the new note, the next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to add that ID to our user's document by saying await users DB, and we're going to import that. It's automatically imported for me up at the top. And we're going to say users DB dot update 1. And what we're going to do is find the user whose ID matches the user ID URL parameter. And then we're going to specify the updates, which will look like this. We're going to say push. And basically what this push operator does is it allows us to add an item to an array on this document that we're finding here. And what we're going to do is we're going to say that we want to push this new note ID onto the notes array, right? The notes property of this user. So what that looks like in MongoDB is we say notes, and then we say new note ID, and that will take care of pushing that new note ID onto the notes array of the user with this corresponding user ID. Okay, and since we're already just sending back the new note itself, we don't really need to change anything else with this route. We will need to make corresponding changes on the front end, which we'll do later on, but for now, that should be fine. And if you want to test this, you can always open up Postman and do so. Okay, but for now, we'll just leave it this way and hope for the best later on. So let's move over to our update note route. And actually, I'm realizing for this one that we're not going to need to make any changes. If we wanted to, we could say path /users/user ID /note ID, but generally that's considered bad form because it's just kind of ugly, right? There's too many IDs, and you can just as easily refer to a note by its ID in this way. Okay, so that helped us in our create note route, adding the user ID, but here, not so much. So let's close our update note route. We don't need that right now. And in our delete note route, we are going to need to make one important change, and that is when we delete this note from the notes collection, we're going to need to also delete that notes ID from the user's notes array, right? Because what'll happen otherwise is inside our list notes route, the user will still have an ID of a note that no longer exists, right? Let's say that we delete note 234. And basically that route will try and find a note corresponding to 234. It won't find anything, and that could potentially cause errors down the line, right? If we get undefined returned for this or something like that. Who knows what could happen? Basically, we just want to avoid that, so let's delete that note ID when we delete the note. Okay, so what that's going to look like is once we've deleted the note, we're going to say, oops, there we go. And first we're going to need to actually import the users DB here. We're going to say await users DB dot update one. We're going to want to update the user with that ID. And here's where things get a little bit tricky because we currently don't know the ID of the user, right? There's nothing inside of here that, that would suggest what the user's ID is. So we could add the user ID to the path here and, say users/user ID/note/note ID. But again, that's a little bit of a pain. So what we're going to do instead is add a property to each of the notes in our database that will contain the ID of the user that created it. Okay, so what that's going to look like, let's open up a shell again. I already have one open here. We're going to say db.notes.update. Okay, and we can do update many here if we want to. And we're going to want to update all of our notes to have the ID of our user here. And we already have the user's ID, so we're just going to copy that. And what we're going to do is we're going to set a new property on each of our notes, which will be called created by. And that's going to be the ID of the only user in our application currently, which we just got from up above. So that should take care of our problem that we're dealing with in our delete note route right now. And if we hit enter, we should see now that 2 notes were modified, right? Modified count should be 2. And what you should see if you say db.notes.find.pretty is you should see that both of our notes now have a created by property which contains the ID of the user that created them. Now, this serves 2 purposes. First of all, it allows us to access the ID of the user that this note belongs to when we want to do things like delete it. And the second thing is that in the future, if we want to do things like display the email of the user that created a given note, we'll just be able to populate that created by property. Right, we'll be able to say find a user with that ID and get their name and basically return that from our server so that our front end will be able to display that easily. Okay, so what we're going to do now is instead of saying delete one, we're going to say find one and delete. And this is similar to the find one and update function that we saw earlier. Find one and delete will just find a document in our MongoDB that matches a given criteria and return it while deleting that document from the database. So, basically we have to do something with that data once we've made that call. So what we're going to do now is we're going to say const result equals await notesdb.find one and delete. That result should contain the note that was deleted, so we can say const deleted note equals result.value. And now that we have the deleted note, we can say users db.update1, and we now know the ID of that user, so we can say ID deleted note dot created by. And what we're going to do is we're going to remove the notes ID from this user's document. And the way that we do that is similar to the push method, except we use the pull method. Okay, so pull in MongoDB will basically remove an item from an array if that's the property of a document in MongoDB. So we can say pull, and we're going to say that we want to remove the notes ID from this user's notes property by saying pull notes, and we're going to say deleted note.id. Okay, so we're removing the notes ID again from the notes property of our user with this ID that we got from the note itself. A little confusing at first, but that should do it. And another thing that we are going to have to do is go back to our create note route now and add that created by property to the new note when we insert it into the database. So we already have the user's ID, so adding this property won't be hard at all. We'll just say created by user ID, and that will take care of inserting that into the database whenever a user makes this request. All right, so let's test these endpoints now with a piece of software like Postman. What I'm going to do is open that up. And I'm going to delete this thing here. What we're going to do is we're going to test out creating a note. Okay, I'm just going to say dismiss. We're going to say post. And the URL here is going to be http://localhost 8080/users/ and then we're going to use that ID that we had from before. So just let me find that again. Here we go, the created by ID. We're going to use that, and we're going to put that inside this URL, and we're going to say /notes, right? So we're creating a new note on the user with this ID. And then for the request body, we're going to replace this stuff that we had there from a previous video, and instead we're just going to say title, and the title here will be equal to something like note created from Postman. Okay, and we should be able to just click send now and see that this works. Actually, let me make sure that the server is running. Yep, sure enough, it looks like it is. We didn't make any syntax errors, fortunately. So let's click on send. And what we should see as a response is our new note that's been created. We should see this created by property, which is equal to the user's ID, which we included in the URL parameter up here. We see the correct title. We see a newly generated ID. And that's that. Now, if you want to actually list those notes, you can just say get, and you can keep this thing the same, right? It'll be users/ID/notes. And if we click send, you should be able to see all of the notes that belong to that user, including the one we just created, which is this note created from Postman object here. And notice again that that has all the correct properties set on it. Now, the last one that we're going to test here is going to be the delete endpoint, and we'll see if this one is correct or if we need to make some adjustments there. What we're going to do is say delete, and we're going to say that we want to delete this note that we created from Postman. So what we're going to do is copy the ID property, and that is ID, not underscore ID. Just ignore that one for now. We're going to copy that ID. We're going to say delete /notes/ and then paste that ID. Right, that's the path that we set up for this. And what we're going to do now, you can even delete this body if you want since we don't need it. We're going to click on send, and we should see this OK response. So now if we go to one of the requests that we made before, which was get/users/blah, blah, blah, right, the list endpoint, and we click send again, we should see that that note that we created is now deleted after that request. So it looks like all of our endpoints are still working, and they're now taking ownership of those notes into account. So we should be free to add more users to our application later on. So anyway, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.